Salt spray crashed over the bow. Captain Ned Elder of the 743rd Tank Battalion studied the 5-foot swells through his binoculars and made a decision that would save hundreds of American lives. The DD tanks would not swim. They would ride their landing craft all the way to the beach. What none of them knew was that this single decision would trigger the most devastating armored breakthrough in the European theater. The hedgerows of France had taught German forces that their Tigers and Panthers were apex predators. Superior armor, devastating 88mm guns, mechanical precision that made them nearly invincible in defensive positions. The Wehrmacht's armored doctrine had established kill zones across the Norman countryside. Hundreds of concealed positions, anti-tank guns sighted on every approach, tank traps and obstacles that would channel Allied armor into predetermined killing fields. The Sherman tank represented American industrial philosophy at its most pragmatic. Unlike German Tigers that cost 250,000 Reichsmarks and required specialized maintenance, the Sherman could be mass-produced, shipped across oceans, and maintained by farm boys from Kansas using basic tools. Chrysler's Detroit tank arsenal alone was producing over 400 Shermans per month by 1944. The mathematics were compelling. While Germany struggled to produce 100 Tigers monthly, American factories churned out over 2,000 Shermans per month at peak production. Tank Commander William Faucus had trained with the 743rd Tank Battalion at Camp Laguna, Arizona. He understood that victory in mechanized warfare wasn't just about armor thickness or gun caliber. It was about putting steel on target, maintaining operational tempo, and most critically, adapting to battlefield conditions faster than the enemy could react. Aboard Panther No. 424 of the 2nd Panzer Division, Unteroffizier Klaus Weber reviewed his ammunition loadout. 79 rounds for the long-barreled 75mm KWK-42 gun. His Panther's frontal armor measured 100mm thick, sloped at 55 degrees for an effective thickness of 140mm. The American 75mm guns couldn't penetrate it beyond 100 meters. Weber's tank displaced 45 tons, powered by a Maybach engine that consumed fuel at rates that would have horrified American logistics officers. The Panther achieved 1 mile per gallon on roads, half that cross-country, but positioned hull down in a Norman hedgerow with interlocking fields of fire, the Panther didn't need to move. It only needed to kill. The German defensive positions at Omaha Beach represented 2 years of fortification work. Widerstandsnest 62, overlooking Easy Red sector, contained multiple machine gun positions, a 50mm anti-tank gun, and mortar pits. The kill zones were mathematically perfect. Overlapping fields of fire created no dead space where attackers could find cover. At 0550 on June 6th, Captain Elder observed the sea state through spray-soaked binoculars. Waves measured 5 to 6 feet. Wind force 18 knots from the west. The DD tank's canvas screens, designed for 3-foot seas, would collapse in these conditions. Of the 64 Sherman DD tanks scheduled to swim ashore at Omaha Beach, only 29 would attempt it. And of those 29, belonging to the 741st Tank Battalion on the eastern sectors, 27 would sink in the cold waters of the English Channel. But Elder's 743rd Tank Battalion would not launch. His 32 DD tanks, plus support vehicles, would ride their LCTs directly onto Dog Green and dog-red beaches. It meant exposing the thin-skinned landing craft to direct fire, but the alternative was watching his tanks disappear beneath the waves. The mathematics of the decision were stark. Risk the landing craft and their naval crews, or lose the tanks and their army crews before they fired a shot. At 06:15, the naval bombardment commenced. USS Texas fired 14-inch shells at the bluffs above Omaha. Smaller destroyers crept within 1,000 yards of the beach, firing directly at visible fortifications. The bombardment was supposed to last 40 minutes, pulverizing German positions before the first wave hit the beach. In reality, most shells overshot their targets. Low clouds forced heavy bombers to release late their payloads, falling harmlessly in fields behind the beach. Of 446 B-24 Liberators that attacked Omaha Beach, not one bomb fell on the beach itself. The Sherman's first combat action at Omaha came at 06:29, 1 minute before H hour. Company A's 743rd Tank Battalion, fitted with deep wading equipment, rolled directly off their LCTs into 4 feet of water. These tanks had been waterproofed with special kits, their exhausts extended with improvised stacks that allowed them to wade through 6 feet of water. The first tanks hit the beach with tracks grinding against the shingle as 75mm guns swung toward the bluffs. The initial German response was devastating. An 88mm anti-tank gun in WN-61 fired 8 rounds in 90 seconds. 3 Shermans exploded their 75mm ammunition, cooking off in spectacular fireballs that could be seen from naval vessels offshore. Machine gun fire sparked off tank hulls like hellish rain. Mortars walked their way across the beach, bracketing tanks with methodical precision. But the Shermans kept coming. By 0700, 40 tanks were on Omaha Beach. Some were already burning. Others threw tracks on the obstacles or bogged in the shingle. But those still operational began engaging German positions with direct fire. The psychological impact was immediate. German infantry, trained to expect an infantry assault, found themselves facing armor that could absorb machine gun fire and respond with high explosive shells. Technical Sergeant John Duco of the 743rd Tank Battalion had landed in the second wave at 0640. His tank immediately took 2 hits from a 50mm anti-tank gun, both rounds penetrating the hull but missing critical components. Duco's driver, Private First Class Howard Froberg, drove directly at the German position, while the gunner pumped 5 rounds of high explosive into the fortification. The anti-tank gun fell silent. This became the pattern. Individual tank commanders, unable to communicate by radio, saltwater had destroyed most sets, fought private wars against specific German positions. A Sherman would absorb multiple hits from smaller caliber weapons, while methodically destroying machine gun nests with its 75mm gun and bow-mounted 30 caliber machine gun. By 0730, the crisis at Omaha Beach was evident to naval observers. General Omar Bradley, watching from USS Augusta, considered diverting follow-up waves to Utah Beach. The 16th Infantry Regiment had taken catastrophic casualties. Company A had ceased to exist as a fighting unit. Company E was down to 23 men from 180. The beach was littered with destroyed equipment and wounded men seeking cover behind German obstacles. But the tanks were making a difference. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Plugger, commanding the 743rd Tank Battalion's Company C, directed his tanks to engage the fortifications at Les Moulins Draw. Using a technique developed in training, tanks would fire white phosphorus rounds to mark targets, then follow with high explosive. The white phosphorus had an additional effect. Its burning particles penetrated vision slits in gun ports, forcing defenders to abandon their positions. At 0815, Widerstandsnest 66 reported to German Sector Command. Quote, "Enemy tanks on beach. Infantry decimated, but tanks advancing. Request immediate anti-tank support." The response was sobering. No mobile reserves were available. The 352nd Infantry Division's anti-tank battalion was positioned 10 miles inland, held back by Field Marshal Rommel's order to defend against expected airborne landings. The beach defenders would have to hold with what they had. The Sherman's mechanical simplicity now proved decisive. Tank Barbara of Company B 743rd Tank Battalion, commanded by Sergeant Walter Basker, took 7 hits from various weapons in the first hour. The tank lost 2 bogie wheels, had its turret traverse mechanism damaged, and suffered a fuel leak. But the crew made field repairs using basic tools and spare parts carried on the tank. By 0900, Barbara was back in action, engaging German positions at Vierville Draw. This was the Sherman's great advantage. A damaged Tiger or Panther required specialized recovery vehicles and trained mechanics. A Sherman could be repaired by its crew using parts cannibalized from knocked-out tanks. Throughout D-Day, Sherman crews performed miracles of field maintenance. Tracks were replaced under fire. Gun barrels damaged by shell hits were swapped in 20 minutes. Engines that should have required depot-level maintenance were coaxed back to life with improvisation and determination. At 0845, the first German armor appeared. 2 Stug 3 assault guns from the 352nd Infantry Division's Assault Gun Battalion engaged the Shermans at 800 meters. Their 75mm Stug 40 guns could penetrate Sherman armor at that range, but the American tanks had a crucial advantage: numbers. For every German assault gun, there were 5 Shermans. The Stugs managed to destroy 2 Shermans before being overwhelmed by concentrated fire from multiple tanks. By 0900, combat engineers supported by tanks had blown gaps in the seawall at Easy Red Sector. Shermans began moving off the beach, engaging German positions from the flank. This was the breakthrough moment. German defensive doctrine depended on keeping attackers pinned on the beach. Once armor penetrated inland, the entire defensive system began to unravel. Private First Class Charles Lombardo of the 741st Tank Battalion had survived the swim to shore in one of only 2 DD tanks that made it. His tank, waterlogged and barely functional, managed to engage and destroy a concrete bunker at 100 meters with 5 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition, followed by high explosive. The bunker had been holding up the advance of an entire infantry company. With its destruction, 150 infantrymen were able to move off the beach. The German response to the armored breakthrough followed established doctrine. Panzerfaust teams were deployed to establish close-range ambushes. The Panzerfaust, a single-shot anti-tank weapon, could penetrate 200 millimeters of armor at 30 meters. In the bocage country behind Omaha Beach, every hedgerow could conceal a Panzerfaust team. But the Americans had learned from the disasters at Kasserine Pass and Sicily. Infantry-tank cooperation had been drilled relentlessly. Every Sherman advancing inland had infantry walking alongside, checking hedgerows and buildings for anti-tank teams. By noon on D-Day, 51 Sherman tanks were operational on Omaha Beach, and its immediate inland areas. They had suffered terrible losses, 40% knocked out or disabled. But they had achieved their mission. The beach was secured. Follow-up waves were landing without catastrophic casualties. Most critically, the psychological impact on German forces was decisive. The myth of impregnable Atlantic wall defenses had been shattered. At German 352nd Infantry Division headquarters, General Dietrich Kreis received fragmentary reports throughout the morning. American tanks overwhelming beach defenses, Widerstandsnests fallen, enemy armor advancing on Colville. By 1300, Kreis understood that Omaha Beach was lost. Without armor reserves to counter the American tanks, his infantry could only conduct a fighting withdrawal. The Shermans' impact extended beyond direct combat. Their presence allowed engineers to clear obstacles without being massacred by machine gun fire. Their 75mm guns could engage fortifications that naval gunfire couldn't reach. Most importantly, their psychological effect on American infantry was transformative. Soldiers who had been paralyzed on the beach began advancing once they saw tanks moving forward. By 1400 on D-Day, American tanks were pushing inland toward their D-Day objectives. The advance was slower than planned. Hedgerows that looked like simple field boundaries on aerial photos proved to be formidable obstacles. These ancient earthen walls, some dating to Roman times, were 3 to 4 feet thick at the base, topped with dense hedges and fronted by drainage ditches. Tanks attempting to climb over exposed their thin belly armor to anti-tank fire. But American ingenuity was already at work. Sergeant Curtis Cullen of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron had noticed that German beach obstacles, steel hedgehogs designed to rip landing craft hulls, could be cut up and welded to tank bows as hedgerow cutting devices. Within hours of landing, maintenance crews were modifying tanks with these improvised hedgerow cutters. A soldier from Tennessee named Roberts had suggested the idea. Quote, "Why don't we get some saw teeth and put them on the front of the tank and cut through these hedges?" Cullen had recognized the brilliance in this simple observation. At 1600 hours on D-Day, Company B, 743rd Tank Battalion, encountered its first Tiger I near Formigny. The Tiger from the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion had been dispatched from its position near Caen to halt the American advance. Tank Commander SS Unterscharführer Wilhelm Müller was a veteran of Kursk, where his Tiger had destroyed 19 Soviet T-34s. His 88mm gun could penetrate a Sherman at 2,000 meters. The engagement demonstrated the tactical evolution American tankers had undergone. Instead of engaging the Tiger head-on, the Sherman platoon leader, Lieutenant James Johnson, ordered smoke rounds fired to obscure the Tiger's vision. While one Sherman maintained suppressing fire, 3 others maneuvered through a small orchard. The Tiger focused on the lone Sherman firing at its frontal armor, didn't notice the flanking movement until too late. At 200 meters, Sherman gunners put 5 rounds into the Tiger's engine compartment. The massive tank shuddered to a halt, smoke pouring from its rear deck. Müller's crew abandoned their burning Tiger, but the psychological impact rippled through German forces. If Tigers could be destroyed by Shermans, what chance did infantry have? Reports reaching German command painted an increasingly dire picture. Enemy tank strength overwhelming, multiple Tiger and Panther losses, infantry retreating from armored spearheads. The reality was more nuanced. For every successful flanking attack, Shermans paid a heavy price in frontal engagements. But American doctrine accepted these losses. The Sherman was designed to be good enough, not perfect. It could be transported by standard Liberty ships, 2 Shermans in the space required for 1 Tiger. It could be maintained by conscript mechanics with 3 months of training. Most importantly, it could be produced in numbers that made losses acceptable. By 1800 on D-Day, the 743rd and 741st Tank Battalions had established a continuous line inland from Omaha Beach. They had lost 48 tanks destroyed or disabled, with 45 crew killed and 60 wounded. But they had put 58 operational tanks ashore and broken the Atlantic Wall. German casualties were harder to quantify, but included multiple fortified positions destroyed, 3 assault guns knocked out, 1 Tiger and 3 Panthers destroyed, and hundreds of infantry casualties. The technological lessons were immediately apparent. The Sherman's 75mm gun, while unable to penetrate heavy German armor frontally, was devastatingly effective against fortifications and infantry. The tank's reliability under combat conditions exceeded expectations. Despite saltwater immersion, beach obstacles, and intense combat, 70% of Shermans that made it ashore were still operational at day's end. In contrast, of 6 Tiger IIs deployed to Normandy in July, 5 would break down before reaching combat. On the night of June 6th to 7th, American maintenance crews worked through the darkness. Using acetylene torches to cut up German beach obstacles, they welded crude but effective hedgerow cutters to Sherman bows. By dawn on June 7th, 15 tanks had been modified. Within a week, 60% of American tanks in Normandy would carry these rhino devices, named because the prongs resembled rhinoceros horns. The German 352nd Infantry Division's war diary for June 7th recorded, quote, "Enemy tank attacks, supported by massive artillery, have made defensive positions untenable. Withdrawal to 2nd Defensive Line authorized." This represented a fundamental shift in German defensive doctrine. The Atlantic Wall hadn't just been breached, it had been rendered obsolete by American armor. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, commander of 1st Army, would later write, quote, "The tanks saved Omaha Beach. Without them, we would have been thrown back into the sea." This wasn't hyperbole. The 29 infantry companies that assaulted Omaha Beach suffered 50% casualties, but the 2 tank battalions, despite heavy losses, maintained offensive capability throughout the day. Their presence turned potential disaster into costly victory. The Panther tank remained technically superior throughout the campaign. Its long 75mm gun could penetrate Sherman armor at ranges where the Sherman's gun was ineffective. But technical superiority couldn't overcome numerical inferiority, logistical constraints, and mechanical unreliability. A study by the British Operational Research Section found that in Normandy, Panthers had only 37% operational availability, compared to 70% for Shermans. The mathematics of attrition were inexorable. Germany produced approximately 6,000 Panthers throughout the entire war. America produced 49,234 Shermans, with nearly 50,000 total when including all variants. In Normandy alone, over 2,000 Shermans would see combat. Even achieving a 3-to-1 kill ratio, which German tanks rarely managed, couldn't stem the tide. For every Panther destroyed, 5 Shermans appeared. For every Tiger lost, 10 Shermans rolled off ships at Normandy's artificial mulberry harbors. By August 1944, the German armor forces in Normandy were effectively destroyed. The 2nd Panzer Division, which had entered combat with 180 tanks, was reduced to 25. The 116th Panzer Division from 120 tanks to 30. The vaunted 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler could muster only 17 operational tanks from an initial strength of 150. German tank commander Otto Carius, who destroyed 150 enemy tanks on the Eastern Front, would later write, quote, "The Americans understood something we didn't. War isn't about having the best tank. It's about having enough good tanks, fuel to run them, parts to fix them, and men trained to use them. We had the best tanks. They had everything else." The Normandy campaign transformed American armored warfare. Lessons learned in the bocage would be applied across Europe. Hedgerow cutters evolved into dozer blades. Tank infantry phones became standard equipment. Most importantly, the mythology of German armored superiority was shattered. American tankers learned they could defeat Tigers and Panthers through superior tactics and teamwork. The Sherman tank would continue to be criticized by historians focused on technical specifications. Its armor was thinner than German tanks, its gun was less powerful, its gasoline engine was more flammable than diesel alternatives. All these criticisms were valid in isolation. But war isn't fought in isolation. The Sherman was part of a system, industrial, logistical, and tactical, that proved superior to German alternatives. German military theorist Heinz Guderian, father of Blitzkrieg, would write in his memoirs, quote, "We made the perfect tank. The Americans made the tank that won the war." There's a lesson in that for all military planners. Perfect is the enemy of good enough, especially when good enough can be produced in overwhelming numbers. The memorial at Omaha Beach today includes a preserved Sherman tank from the 743rd Tank Battalion. Its hull still bears scars from German shells. Flowers are regularly placed on it by French civilians who remember the liberation. In the final analysis, the Sherman tank's success at Normandy and beyond wasn't about armor thickness or gun caliber. It was about American industrial capacity producing 1,000 tanks monthly. It was about farm boys from the Midwest maintaining complex machinery under fire. It was about tactical innovation like the Rhino hedgerow cutter that transformed battlefield dynamics overnight. Most fundamentally, it was about the arsenal of democracy proving that quantity has a quality all its own. The numbers tell the story. In June 1944, Germany had approximately 1,500 operational tanks on all fronts. America alone produced 2,000 Shermans that month. By August, Allied forces in Northwest Europe fielded 4,000 tanks. German forces had fewer than 500. The mathematics of modern industrial warfare had rendered tactical superiority irrelevant. The Tiger might win individual battles, but the Sherman had already won the war. On June 6, 1944, at 0629 hours, the first Sherman tanks of Company A 743rd Tank Battalion rolled off the beach at Normandy. The war in the West was effectively decided at that moment, though hundreds of thousands would die before its conclusion. The Sherman tank, imperfect, mass-produced, manned by citizen soldiers, had broken the Atlantic Wall and begun the liberation of Europe.